I'm Corby Kummer, senior editor at The Atlantic, with
Dave Friedman,
writer of our extremely provocative new cover story in our July-August Ideas issue, with the unbelievably controversial idea that junk food is the way to end obesity in this country, the number one health problem, the number one economic problem. I wrote a piece in Smithsonian that was also taking the idea that it's processed food that can lead us to better default health, whatever us foodies say about wholesome food. I focused more on the food industry and cereal. You're focusing more on junk food. But talk about what you found when you went to the heart of the great Satan, McDonald's, and you saw them engineering healthier options that they won't talk about, which, as I was finding when I talked to food industry, is one of the keys. Don't talk about it.
They really did not want to sell anybody on the healthfulness of their food because they've had bad experiences with it. In particular, most famously, the McLean Deluxe back in the 1990s, a lower fat version of their quarter pounder with cheese, basically. And it actually wasn't that bad. My wife and I loved it. And it did well in taste tests, but once word got out that it was supposed to be a super healthy burger, everyone assumed it was terrible and didn't eat it. And this, of course, parents know this. If you want to turn a kid off to food, tell them it's good for them. What people want to know is, it's delicious, I'm going to love it. Fatty foods and foods with a lot of sugar or refined carbs or starch, they have very powerful tastes. I mean, they really press all our buttons neurologically. And so you tell somebody to switch to vegetables, they're not going to do it. So McDonald's understands this. They're not going to go out and make a lot of health claims or low calorie or low fat claims for the foods. But the fact is they've quietly been sneaking this stuff onto the menu for years, and they've really stepped it up lately with a bunch of new grilled chicken wraps. And they're wonderful. I think they're absolutely wonderful egg white delight sandwiches, and they're adding whole grain to their muffins now. And I think that's a big deal. Most of the obese in this country are not affluent, and the fact that they can get a cheap junk food meal is a really, really big deal. And efforts to minimize that, I think, are just appalling.
The lead of the piece is a very long and very entertaining visit to Los Angeles and various, which you call the epicenter of healthy fast food, with all of these places that are trying to market retooled, more wholesome, more local versions of what people are used to in fast food to give them quick choices that are very healthy. And you weren't terribly swayed. Why?
Well, in a nutshell, it turns out that what you get at a lot of places that hawk, so what I like to call wholesome food as a shortcut, but as you say, farm fresh, it's unprocessed, most importantly, tends to be local, it's seasonal, they like to brag about the local farms that this stuff comes from. It has a lot of fat, often a lot of sugar, often a lot of salt, and a lot of refined carbs and starches. And I'm sorry, but that makes it obesogenic. It's fattening. I don't care if it's from the farm around the corner or from a McDonald's factory, that stuff is fattening. This has been shown again and again and again. Everybody seems to agree on this, and yet it gets a pass at wholesome restaurants and stores.
But the idea that a processed food can strip away and add back vitamins and minerals, and that it will be just as good for the body, completely goes against the entire whole food movement, the entire idea that these nutrients aren't properly processed by the body and aren't healthful for you unless they are integrated, because they inhere in foods with many, many other compounds, some of which you know about, some of which we don't. You are a science writer. You know this argument very well. You don't happen to give it much lip service in this piece. Why is that, and what's your defense?
So my main defense is, even 11,000 words wasn't enough for me to say a fraction of what I would have loved to have said about this. So I would say, first of all, I didn't mean to dismiss the claim that processed foods may in some ways be less nutritious, possibly even less healthy in the long run, possibly even robbing of life expectancy to some extent. What I do mean to say in the article, and I hope this was clear, is that scientists have looked at this question very, very closely, and the evidence is very, very scant, practically non-existent, that there's any really strong difference between the two. If there is one, it's probably not a big one. Obesity, on the other hand, robs, on average, according to the most recent large study, a decade of life. How much life is possibly being robbed by eating processed versions of wholesome foods? It couldn't possibly be 10 years. We'd have noticed that. That would be incredibly obvious. I think if we switch to wholesome food completely, maybe we'll add a couple of weeks, a couple of months, maybe a year to our lives. I doubt it. We're not going to be adding 10 years to our lives. If we were obese, though, and we ate processed foods but made healthy choices there, we could add 10 years to our life.
But what do you think is going to make people who are disadvantaged and don't know buy enough of these to reduce obesity?
I think one of the huge keys there is to take this one small step at a time. And asking people to jump to salads, whether they're farm fresh or whether they're from McDonald's, it's too big a leap for most obese junk eaters. They're just not going to do it. And let's remember something. This is important to point out because a lot of people who are against the processed food industry are really against capitalism. There's a tremendous amount of...
That's a pretty sweeping accusation.
It is, but I keep running into it. I see it in articles and I see it in a lot of the people I talk to. What they really hate is the idea of large companies controlling the food supply. So when they say they hate McDonald's, they hate the food industry, they hate the big agricultural companies, they hate Monsanto, and genetically modified food comes into this. Well, what they really mean is, they hate the way our society is structured and run and the way our economy is set up, which tends to favor these giant companies. If that's someone's problem, well, that's above my pay grade if they want to change capitalism. So let's understand something. The way this country works is if a company isn't going to make money selling it, we can't expect them to sell it. Maybe it'll take 10 years, but that's actually not a long time to solve a problem of the magnitude of the obesity crisis. If the goal is, let's solve this problem by having everybody in America eat from tiny local farms, then I think it's probably going to be 100 or 200 years. And billions of years of life will be lost while we wait for that to happen.
All right, so you have now a behavioral test of what is going to raise your Qs. What did I get when I had bought my Chobani yogurt? Not my favorite brand, but at least they have yogurt. $2 off $6 cookies, chips, or nuts purchase. I want to know what CVS knows about me. I have never bought cookies, chips, or nuts at CVS. But here are the incentives. So what do you think companies are going to do to give incentives to buy, if not salads, at least some of their retooled foods that you talk about a lot in the Atlantic piece?
So this is a big problem. Right now, all the incentives are pushing in the wrong direction. For companies, we're not rewarding them for doing the right thing. So that's one reason I wish we'd go in there with regulation. If a new CEO comes into McDonald's, or the existing CEO, who by the way is losing weight, he's on a diet right now, I'd like to point out, congratulations.
Did you trade diet tips?
No, not at all. Although, he's already lost 20 pounds, good for him. And he's still eating at McDonald's every day. Anyway, if the CEO of McDonald's decides tomorrow we're only going to sell lower fat, lower sugar, lower calorie food here, they'd lose their market overnight, or big chunk of it. Everybody would switch to Burger King and Wendy's, and the CEO would be removed by the board of directors, answering to the shareholders. That's the way it works. We have to give him, or whoever, a chance to make money doing this. So one way is the government could set up all kinds of incentives. We could have various tax incentives for companies that actually sell healthier food. The government can help these companies market. The government could take out advertisements saying, hey, McDonald's has really done some great things this year. These are the following fast food chains that we are going to hold up. You could have the President of the United States or his or her spouse standing up there and actually calling out companies. And we could get the healthcare industry involved in this as well. and giving these companies some sort of recognition and reward, a marketing reward that they can take to the bank that will bring people in and that will actually reward them for doing it. And we, as more affluent consumers or health-minded consumers, we can stop turning our backs on processed food companies as being the great Satans, and instead, let's start eating there, eating the healthier things, and that would be an enormous incentive for them to offer more of this stuff.
All right. Well, I would say those are great incentives for us all to read your article, which doesn't go into those terrific ideas. That's the next step after we're convinced that we have to pay more attention to processed foods as one of the main routes to better health in our country. And now as incentive, which are we going to open? I'm starting with these.
Yeah, good for you. Now see, I see the word protein right away and I start salivating. I've really brainwashed myself, so protein to me is healthy. And I would happily eat a protein chewy bar. I wish I see it only has 10 grams.
Yeah, look at the calorie count.
I know. That's because there's also a ton of carbs in most protein bars. It's actually hard to find a protein bar that has more protein than sugar and carbs. Kind of frustrating. But it's a step in the right direction, probably better than Doritos.
Ah. All right, then protein bars for you, Three Musketeers for me.
Cheers.
And thanks to Kasha. That's right.